Hello, my name is Dimitar and welcome to another session of architectural concept design with Blender. In this session, we'll further elaborate our concept design and add a few more details like benches within this pavilion object here. We'll learn how to work with an existing object and use it as a base to further create more detail. So that's the scene that we have at the moment. And we also have the trees here that are represented as boxes. So the first thing we'll do is actually just turn off the boxes since they're a little bit heavy. So if we go to the layer in which they're located, which is layer 13, we also have this fence, so I'll just select the fence and move it, M, to this bottom layer here. So now we'll work with this layer, and this layer. And our cameras, they're located in this far end. Okay, so this is once again where we left off last time, and then we just want to add a little bit more detail to it and potentially clean up the shape a little bit. And we can modify it infinitely with our lattice that we have created here. So I would like to simplify it slightly and create it smoother and sort of untangle it in a way that we can use it easier later. So if we select our lattice, what we can do if we go to object data is change the U, V, and W subdivisions. Now changing them will interpolate between the current divisions for a smooth interpolation. So you can see what's happening here with the result and with our lattice object. And we'll change the V, U, and V, and W. So we have something very, very simple to start with, and then we can build it up. Then we're also going to use the cat move roam interpolation. And again, you can see how this changed a little bit, which is all these interpolations here, they're essentially different types of curves between the maximum value, which is, let's say, this vertex, and the minimum value, which is here. There's a linear interpolation, so that's a straight line, and then the others are different types of curves for influence. So the cat move roam is a sharper curve in the sense that when we move this vertex, it has less influence on this vertex here. Hence the reason for us using it, because we can use a little bit less subdivisions. Okay, so now with our lattice selected, if we go into edit mode by hitting tab, and I'll isolate my object, and once again we can isolate by going to view global local, and let's select all of these vertices. Again, if you're using the UH Studio hotkeys, this should be like with any other program. And if not, you need to select B to get the border window. Okay, so now let's scale them. Scale Z0 to have them all in the same place. And we can see that they're a little bit further than what we care about is our global Z. So let's make that 0 with all of them selected, and you can see they all drop down. So now if we exit out of isolation mode, we can see the effect. Okay, we'll keep this fairly simple for now until we get a little bit more of the details in. So if I go back to the rendering, and I can switch this window to a UV and image editor. So this is a fairly big object. This fence here is about 2 meters, and those trees, they're very large. So within it, what I would like to do is subdivide the space. I have 2 rows of seating that's fairly isolated. So maybe we can have 3, 4, 5 people in one row and 3, 4, or 5 people in the other row to sit and enjoy the space quietly. It's meant to be a reflection space for busy workers to come near the park, enjoy a view of the garden, and be able to maybe close their eyes for a couple of minutes. Anyways, so to get what we want, we'll subdivide this space into 2 and create benches on either side of them. And we'll do this by working with this existing object here and then duplicating parts of it in a very similar manner like we did the support elements here. So let's go back into our 3D view and get started. So let's select our key driver here. Oops. Now, because of all the arrays that we have, it may take a second or two for the selection to work. So now let's go into edit mode and now turn off the solidify modifier viewable in edit mode. And yes, these icons here, if they're on, we can see the modifier in edit mode, and if they're off, we don't see them. So Control R for subdivide, scale, and we'll scale in the Y direction, 0. And now we'll bevel. Oh, I haven't turned on my hotkeys so you can see what I'm doing. Here you go. Let's make him a little bit larger. Okay, so now if I press W, bevel, and we'll bevel to an actual size, we can input a number, 0.1. And again, remember with any of these commands, if we go into our tool shelf here, and we can dynamically change it after we've clicked. So maybe I decided I want this to be 0.15. Actually, 0.1 is fine. Okay, close the tool shelf with T. Control Tab, select the edge. Select this edge, E for extrude, Z. E for extrude, and then we press Z. And it doesn't matter exactly where we put it, because then we can modify it in the properties shelf. And to open it, scroll the way up, we have the Z coordinates, and we'll just change those to to 0. So now that's exactly at 0. Okay, so now we've created a subdivision and we have a front and a back to work with. So the next thing we'll do is create our bench. So if we go again back into here, Control R for subdivision. Let's move this up 45 centimeters. Do the same here, Control R. Let's move this up 45 centimeters, which is about the height of a bench. You can see the space is pretty large. In fact, we may need to shrink it down a little bit, because if a bench is here, if a person is sitting down, he's about that height, and this space is going to feel quite big. Okay, so now that we have, let's go into vertex select, E for extrude, lock the axis with the middle mouse button, and let's make these 0.6. Okay, now let's select the whole edges, extrude, Z, 0.1 in the negative direction. So now we have our benches, and now what we'll do is let's go to face select by hitting Control Tab. Select this face and select that face, and we'll separate them from this mesh so we can refine it a little bit more. So P, selection, And while we're at here still, let's just erase these edge loops. So select edge mode and X for delete menu, and then edge loops. We'll do the same here. X, edge loops. So we're done with this object, and now if we go back and see what we have here, we also have the benches. Now, they probably need to be a little bit denser because that wouldn't be very comfortable to sit on. So if we select them, we may need to go into wireframe mode, which we toggle with Z. And we'll just change the array to make it twice as dense. So if we open the array again, if it's in this window here, the object modifiers, and we change the spacing from 0.3 to 0.15. And now there's half as many, so we need to increase the count. And with the beautiful thing about all the windows in which we can type is that we can also input formulas. So I can put 70 times 2 and we get 140. Okay, great. So now that's looking a little bit more like benches, and we'll add some supports underneath them. So again, tab, we'll go into edit mode. And this will go here. And let's create edge loops again. Control R. Move it all the way to the edge, so then we can offset it a very precise distance, which will be 0.1. Let's do that again. Control R. Undo. Control R. Get it all the way to the edge. And let's type 0.1 negative. Now we want to also leave a little bit of space in the front of the bench. So Control R again, move this, and let's shift select those two edges and move them 5 centimeters in. So 0.05 minus. Okay, let's go into edge select, extrude, Z, 0.1 minus. Let's do the same here. So Control R, move it all the way to the back, then move it 10 centimeters in. Control R, move it all the way to the front, move it 10 centimeters in. Control R again, move it all the way to the front, and shift select these two edges and move them 5 centimeters, 0.05 in. Okay, now you can see how with my mouse, by the way, right now it's a little bit jumpy when I zoom in and out. Maybe I want to zoom in and out a little bit more precise. What we can do is hold Control and right mouse button, or rather middle mouse button, to zoom in a little bit more dynamically. Okay, so let's select this edge and this edge. E for extrude, type the button Z, minus 0.1. Alright. So now let's go to face select, Control Tab, select the faces, and we'll separate those elements because we would like to make them solid. So they'll be slightly different. So shift select all of them, P, selection, and now they've separated. And while we're here, let's erase the edge loops. So click this, X for delete menu, edge loops. And what the delete the edge loop does is it takes out the edge loop, as long as we're dealing with quads, in a very perfect manner. So it's a great way, if we have a complex geometry that we've created, to simplify it in a non-destructive way. So I use this quite often. So we select again edge, X, edge loops, X, edge loops. And we can also select a few of them at the same time. So if I select all of these, and again X, edge loops. Right, so now this is nice and clean. It's located where it needs to. Underneath we have supports, and now we just need to make them continuous. So let's just select the supports. And now we will just work with the modifiers. So the first thing that we need to do is make sure that they're not breaking. These elements, they need to be continuous throughout the whole bench. And what we'll do is add this constant offset of 15 centimeters to the thickness that we have here. So we'll type 0.08 plus 0.15. Alright, so now they're the right thickness, but you can notice that there's still something wrong. They're not really continuous. Not as continuous as they should be. Let's just select that one layer, which is all this geometry. We can just hit the 1 key. Okay, so how do we make this smoother? In fact, let's isolate it to see even better. Okay, so they're sort of staggered, and this is because of the modifiers order. So right now the first, let's turn them all off. And we need to put them here. So the first thing that happens is that we array them. And then we deform them with the lattice. Then we put them on the curve. And then the last thing that we do is give the solidification. So the thickness, the solidify, it's already taking into account quite a few other things, but in order for it to be smoother, it needs to happen before all the deformations. So these two buttons here, they can move the modifiers up or down. So if we shift them up, and now it's smooth. So we put the solidifier before the lattice and the curve modifiers. So now if we exit out of isolation mode, of local mode, again you can see that from view, global local, that's one shortcut, which is the Blender default. And if you're using the UH Studio shortcuts, you can also press, as you can see, Shift/. Okay, so now we have this detail done, and let's pick up our geometry again to create thresholds for entrances. So if we're going to the lattice, in fact, let's work in a little bit of a different way. I'll drag this corner out here, which creates two views. In one view, let's select both of them, Control-6 to zoom in, just so it's a little bit easier for it to be modified. Okay, so in one view, we have our object, and then here we have our lattice. So they're more or less now facing the same way, so we can see the deformations from one to the other. Okay, so let's straighten this up a little bit by moving these vertices in. Let's move that one in as well. In fact, let's completely start again. Okay, so now we have something that's fairly straightforward. I'll even move these two so they're a little bit more perpendicular to the ground. I remember one of the best things that my 7th grade math teacher told me was KISS. Keep it simple and stupid. And every so often I'm reminded about this. Very, very simple concept. Okay, so now we have a nice base geometry where essentially if we look down, we start from this edge and then we go up. And we can even move this slightly out more. And on one side it's leaning out and then it starts to lean in, or the other way around. On one side it's leaning in and then it starts to lean out. And maybe let's just bring this vertex slide up, so that corner is completely embracing the garden. Okay, so now we can start to subdivide this more. Let's add a few more subdivisions. And let's start to lift some items up. Now, so let's lift that up and move it out once again. And we'll do the same here. We'll lift the back corner up and out. To create our entrance. Now you can see that when I lift this point up, there's an influence also the middle parts. That's because we don't have an extra subdivision of our lattice. So if I undo this, Control Z, a couple of times, we'll add just a couple more of the subdivisions of our lattice. And as you can see, we have that same effect there. So in fact, let's add that many more subdivisions, and I'll select all these bottom points. Scale them to 0, so we make them all flat. S, Z, 0. And open the properties to shelf and make sure we're on global and we make that 0. It's a little bit off of 0, but I think a couple of hundredths of a millimeter should be alright. Right, so yes, we started simple, but we're subdividing it again because we want to end up with something that's fairly uniform. And the benches inside work. So now just pick up these corners again. In fact, yeah, I believe this one stays where it is. Yeah, so we want to keep this pretty much where they are. Okay. It's leaning quite a bit. Let's move this out a little bit. As well as those two. Sometimes the transformer, the manipulator, can get in the way like it does here for me to select it. So we can temporarily disable it with either this icon here, or as you can see, if you hover over it, the shortcut is Control Spacebar. So Control Spacebar, Shift Select, Control Spacebar again, and let's just see what we're doing here. Right, okay, so that's good. Let's just move that point a little bit up higher and a little bit out. Our benches are in the right place still, so that's what we want. Let's do the same now on this side. Pick up the edge and let's just make sure that we're seeing what we're doing here. And in this back side, pick up both of these edges, because this side, this rear side, is a little bit different because we have the bench along of it, whereas in the front we don't have a bench. So we have to be conscious also of the depthness of the bench. Okay, so now we've picked it up. And what I want to do also is create another threshold that gets us between this rear area and this front section. So to do that, we can do exactly the same. We'll pick up one of the middle points. Let's just see where the middle is. So that's about the middle. So let's just see what happens. If we move it up, great. So now somebody from the front can pass through. And I'll just pick this slightly up. Let's just see what the kind of space that we formed inside. Right, so now you can see that somebody could have a very, very nice time, you know, sitting here and enjoying the view, or just being in a quiet space. Okay, so now that we have these two new options, or rather one new option with a little bit more detail, what's quite important also is to compare it to our previous versions. So if I click and hold that corner, we see an arrow. The way that it's pointing is the way that it's closing. So now we have just this. Let's exit out of edit mode. And turn on our other context layers to see what we have. Okay, so that's our bench for now. That's our pavilion. So let's render it again. I'll turn on the trees. Now, great. In fact, let's split this again and go into UV image editor. So that's the old version, and we just want to render the same one and sort of compare them. So the way to do that is what we have here, render result, and we have a couple of slots. So we'll select the second slot. So now if you render, it's going to keep it in the second slot. So then we can view both at the same time. So it's quite important to keep good track of our work, and which is what we can do with these render slots. And we can continue to do that further by duplicating, for example, this lattice and modifying it further. Now, because this is non-destructive modifier, if we go to all of our objects here, which are 4, we have the skin, and we have the skin supports, the benches and the bench supports, and they're all using, it's going a little bit slow at the moment just because I'm rendering. And if we go into the modifiers, and they're all using one object which is called lattice. So we can easily change this lattice to another version of the same lattice and to get a different iteration of how we look at this. Now that's quite good if we consider a couple of more angles that we're looking at this, and we can easily set up many renderings, quick ones like this, and analyze them. So again, we can do this within Blender, or if we wanted to, image, save as image, and now we have saved it in the folder. Okay, so how do we compare to within Blender? So if we split another window and we go to slot 1, here we go to slot 2. So yeah, we have different slots. And that show the different things. Let's duplicate this layer here. Right, so now we can see both of them side by side. So 1, this should be empty. And you can see that these are actually quite different now. And it doesn't matter what we think about the architecture, because I'll leave that up to you. But the idea is that we can very, very quickly create different iterations. And keep in mind how easy it is to start with one object, we deform it, and we use the same object as a base to create all of our other objects. And when we duplicate them, they also, all the objects also, if you've noticed, duplicated all the modifiers. That's it for this tutorial. Thank you, and see you next time.